Riverfront Parks Now, a citizen-led coalition of nonprofit organizations who want to maximize public green spaces and access to public lands and parks in the riverfront in Jacksonville. Nancy Powell is the executive director of Scenic Jacksonville, and Jimmy Orth is the executive director of the St. John's Riverkeeper, each of whom has done many, many great things to enhance the communities over the years. Communities of surrounding Jacksonville and specifically in the downtown area. You may read brief bios of them on our Facebook page or their Facebook or their website, our website. Their credentials are long. I don't want to get through all of their credentials. We won't get through the meeting if we do that. So suffice it to say, they're very well schooled on this topic that they're going to be talking about this evening. And there's going to be plenty of time for questions and a healthy Zoom chat at the conclusion of the presentation. And should you prefer, you may message a question via the chat feature on Zoom. Please mute your mic until it's time to speak and know that we are recording for posterity. So let's enjoy the time, the expertise, and the dialogue graciously offered to us by Riverfront Parks Now. Nancy and Jimmy, we're eager to listen. Thank you very much. All yours.
Okay, and I'm just sharing my screen here, so it should be coming up. Does everybody see that? And this time of the day, yes. This time of the day, the light is weird in my Zoom room, so apologize for that. But yeah, thanks so much for having us on this. We're always excited to talk with community groups and hear your questions, suggestions. This is a true grassroots movement. Okay, we started last year when the resiliency subcommittees were being formed. You might have remembered, Council member Carlucci and then DeFore led these subcommittees, and many of our organizations that are in our coalition are also a member of the Resilient Jacks Coalition, which is a similar, different focus, but we found that many of our organizations have similar interests and alignment, and there's strength in numbers. And so Jimmy and I, we started meeting after those meetings. We started talking about downtown resiliency, natural shorelines versus bulkheads, what's going to happen with McCoy's Creek. And at the time, the landing had just come down, right? You remember now the landing is sitting there with grass, but it had just been, we'd watched it come down. The courthouse had come down. And so, we started to understand that there's a huge opportunity in front of us. Right now, this is the list of the organizations that are part of our group. We are, not exclusive. A lot of these have worked together on different things, but they have all expressed an interest in this initiative. And this slide here is really one of the key slides that we started with. It's a slide we saw in a Downtown Investment Authority a presentation. We recreated it actually, but everything you see that's in color on this slide is publicly owned property without any encumbrances on it. Nothing, no legal contracts. Well, I shouldn't say that, except for number 5 here is the old courthouse property on number 5. That was awarded to Spandrel, a developer, to develop that parcel, but it's kind of stalled right now. So we're not sure what's going to happen to that. So you can see the blue line here is the North Bank Riverwalk. So that's kind of a public park, public access. This is a little, number 2 is Sydney Geffen Park. It's a 3-acre park. Number 3 is the landing, and number 4 is the landing's parking lot. So that's the available spot there. And then on the South Bank, you have the Riverwalk as well and Friendship Fountain. But South Bank has much less available property for public use. And of course, these dotted lines are the extension of the Riverwalk, which also will connect into the Emerald Trail. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The Emerald Trail also has McCoy's Creek, which is right over here by the Main Street Bridge. and Hogan's Creek over here. So on the right-hand side here, this number 6, this large piece of property here, and it looks a little larger than it is because it includes the submerged lands, but that's the Shipyards property. That's been vacant since 1992. Several developers have had contracts on it, have done a little bit of work on it. Essentially, it's still vacant. And then on number 7 here is the full 24-acre Metropolitan Park. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that has been pretty much, it was great in its heyday. A lot of you may remember it. It was left for, it's basically just been woefully ignored. And so, but we looked at this whole view and we said, whoa, we've got this opportunity here because 90% of the St. Johns riverfront lands throughout Duval County are already private, okay? And so there's not that much public land as far as riverfront parks as, many cities would have. And as it turns out, we saw that there's the opportunity before us is a connected network. This is our vision, a connected network of active parks and extensive green space to include at least a signature park that's a destination that people want to come to 365 days a year that's along our downtown riverfront. And the benefits, what was really cool about studying, what we did is we studied other cities, but what we found is that it's multiple benefits in one project. And it's to provide not only a community gathering space, which has health, social wellness, social equity, COVID benefits, the whole gathering place for the community, but also to stimulate economic development. We see this as an economic driver, and we've seen it in other cities. It's proven in other cities to do this. If you create really high quality parks and green spaces that people want to go to, the developers will follow the people. And then thirdly, though, and really importantly, is that the resilient aspect of creating a buffer from the river to the inland properties, there's natural ability, there's natural ways to create parks and stormwater systems that we're going to talk a little bit more about. So that's the opportunity before us. And I grew up in Chicago, so we like to start with this slide because it illustrates kind of at a glance the value of the real estate that's behind this park. Okay, so now this park, Grant Park, is huge, right? The Millennium Park, which you may have heard of, is in the far corner of this, way back here. It's 24 acres, and that's just this corner. They also have a Pritzker Pavilion, which is where the symphony and the orchestra plays. And then this whole area here is a big, huge kids park. But this has gone through many, many years of ups and downs. It was not always like this, and it wasn't, so it's been under constant change and renewal. But you can see that the views of that real estate behind the park can see the lakefront. The lake is beautiful, but they have lakefront views and they have park views. It can go together. It's not an either or. The other thing that Chicago illustrates is connectedness. So this is connected to 18 miles of parks and beaches and green space along the lakefront. And that was something that Chicago did early on. They reserved all of this area to the right of the Lakeshore Drive for the public. And then in the past year, they also have created the Chicago Riverwalk, which is along the Chicago River, goes perpendicular to the lake, and it's built in phases. It has different blocks with different themes. And this theme that you're looking at right now is a wetland area. So it's a place for people to learn about the ecology of the river. But there's other blocks that have, cornhole and tiki huts and other blocks that have nice restaurants. It's really an incredible development. And it was nothing, until 10 years ago. So then we say, okay, we're not Chicago. So let's take a look at some other parks. And Detroit. Detroit's park here, it's being designed by one of the top park designers, urban park designers across the country, Van Valkenburg Associates. It's 22 acres and it will attract 3 million visitors. Detroit also connects to their Joe Louis Trailway system. So this is another theme, as many of these cities have done the trail systems, are doing them simultaneously, and they're connecting together with their downtown riverwalks and trails throughout their communities. And this Riverwalk for Detroit was just named the best Riverwalk of 2020 by, I can't remember the source. So then we have Louisville Waterfront Park. I actually visited this park last year. It's an 85-acre park, and you can see they have a bridge, kind of like the Main Street Bridge. The city and the building is in the background across the street. But they have found it to be so successful and such a critical piece of their revitalization of their downtown. They are adding 22 more acres. And here's another view of that same park. So it's a major place for events, gatherings. Of course, this was before the pandemic, but you know, a park like this provides for people to social distance in that event. And you can see in the background here, there's a basketball stadium. So, you know, it can go together with, and then they have kind of a Heart Bridge type of road. But the other thing about this park system is that across the river is Clarksville, Indiana. And Clarksville is doing a 400-acre riverfront park built for resiliency. And they have a pedestrian bridge across, and they are looking at this as a regional destination. So both sides of the river, and this is another thing we see, is both sides of the river are green and active. You know, when we say parks, we mean parks where people want to go and spend the day, and there's enough to do between the different things that are in the park and around the park that they can do that. Memphis, Tennessee is embarking on this plan this past fall. They just broke ground on this. It's a 30-acre park. They look at it as the vision is to be a connected, catalytic, and fun riverfront. There's 4 separate zones that have been created for different types of uses. So one's a civic zone where they honor civic leaders. There's an active core, which has more, playgrounds and other things. There's a community zone and a habitat zone. They have a tree walk where you can go through the trees and experience. So all of these parks are experiential. They're not passive areas. In Brooklyn, in New York, we show this one for a couple reasons. One is it's a great adaptive reuse of shipping piers. This is another large park, 85 acres, stretching along the East River. And what's also, they've got barbecue pits here. It's a place for everyday people. They've got soccer fields and other types of ball fields. And the other important part about this park is you see this development here in the corner. This was a controversial development, but it's on 10% of the land. It contributes to 90% of the park's maintenance. So, back to this either or, it's not either or development or parks. It can be both. It needs to be planned out well and for good complementary use. Another example is Smale Riverfront Park in Cincinnati. And this is one of my favorites because I've been there and it's an amazing park. It's along the Ohio River. And you can see, again, this bridge looks like our Main Street Bridge. This is 32 acres, and look at the situation from above. So it's not just by one stadium, but it's by 2 stadiums. They moved this road back so that they created more parkland. And you can see, again, in between the 2 stadiums is a major development. It's called the Banks. And it also has development fees that contribute to the maintenance of the park. But notice that the buildings are set back not just from the river, but from the street there. There's park space in between the buildings and the street. And of course, those all have river views. So that's our vision of our riverfront is, we have lots of infill opportunities in downtown Jacksonville. We don't have to build right up to the edge of the land. And if you think about our South Bank, we had to build the Riverwalk into the river because the private property went up to the edge of the land. And we do not want that to happen on the North Bank. Even though the South Bank Riverwalk is very nice, there's no extra space around it. Here's a view of the Riverwalk here in Smale Riverfront Park. So again, it's built with lots of design and enjoyment that you can sit and look at the riverfront. It has features that attract children and adults and families and people from all over without necessarily, you can have a lot of, they also have other kid features where you can spend a half a day there. Columbus, Ohio. So here we've got two cities in Ohio. And it's like, if Ohio could do it, we could do it. This actually has this is the, on the left side of the river here is the National Veterans Museum. And so museums and parks definitely can go together. This project was a project, and some of these are started with they did something with the river where they were deepening or making the river flow better. So something with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they ended up being able to create some of this land along the riverfront. So it connected to a greenway of 10 miles. And here's a close-up of one part of this park, which is Bicentennial, a section of this park where they have community gathering, and then another section where they have a major water feature of a park. And then we also then looked at parks that were, any parks that were built in the last 5 years are built with resiliency in mind. And so I'm going to let Jimmy take over for this section.
Hello, everybody. We're really glad to be here tonight. And I want to say real quick, before I jump into the resiliency part of this, that what really and I want to reiterate, is that when Nancy and I and others in our group started really looking at all of these other parks, as you can see, there's so many co-benefits. I think that's the thing that really struck us about parks, is that when we built parks originally, historically, it was more to create a gathering space for the public, for recreational opportunities. But now we're starting to recognize that there's so many other benefits that these parks can provide for our communities, from literally being an incentive for economic development, which these other communities have really utilized parks instead of just giving away tax advantages to private development. They're actually building the public infrastructure that people want to enjoy. They want to be around where they live and where they work. And also, of course, this resiliency component. And there was a good question before we got started about, what is resiliency exactly? And I think it's important to define, because it has become quite the buzzword. We're hearing that term all the time now. And it really is, in its most simplistic form, is it's the ability to quickly bounce back after a traumatic or really impactful event, such as in this situation, what we're talking about is mostly talking about environmental resiliency in terms of helping to protect us from storm surge and from sea level rise. And so this is a good example. In New York City, as we all know, if you remember when Hurricane Sandy came through, caused it was devastating to New York City. They recognized after that just how vulnerable they are to sea level rise and to storm surge. So they started looking to the riverfront and saying, okay, how can we put in natural infrastructure? You'll also hear the term used, green infrastructure, but this idea of natural infrastructure that can help protect us from these storms. And so this is a great example of this park. There's a lot of other examples throughout New York City, but this was a former industrial site. This park was actually, before it was an industrial site, looked more like this. Frankly, it's in a floodplain, so there were wetlands and things and natural features like that. So they went back and said, you know what? Let's try to recreate to a certain extent the natural hydrology of this area, while also providing an opportunity for the public to enjoy the recreational opportunities that it provides. And so this park is actually designed to flood, to hold stormwater, and to actually serve as a buffer for storm surge if we have another storm, which we know we will at some point. Boston is the same thing. They are doing it on an extensive scale. This is not just a one-off park initiative. This is actually looking at holistically their waterfront and how can they protect themselves from future storms and from sea level rise. And they've identified all of these natural areas, existing parks or areas that they can enhance with natural features, or even in some cases retreat from the shoreline, so that they're actually pulling back infrastructure and different and homes and businesses away from the shoreline to actually provide that buffer. And so this is quite extensive. It's it's obviously a long-term initiative, but it's something that they've recognized that these natural features can help protect the city while at the same time increasing and enhancing the quality of life for the residents. One thing too that has been interesting is how now parks are also looking at how can we incorporate the opportunities in parks to capture and treat stormwater. I was actually at this park several years ago, went with my wife, and we went to this park. We got the bike, we did the bike share, and we're riding our bikes around Nashville, stumbled across this park and really thought this was a cool park. One thing I didn't know at the time though, is that I was standing on top of a massive cistern that's actually capturing stormwater and helping prevent flooding in the surrounding urban areas. And so this is a perfect example of how parks are being used not only for the recreational benefits, but also to help manage stormwater and prevent that stormwater from flowing out into the river or from providing or for contributing to flooding in surrounding urban areas. This park too, we talked about the economic benefits. So you can see in this bullet here that after this park and the adjacent park next to it were built, and the adjacent park, if you're familiar with Nashville, it's the park right behind the stadium, the football stadium they have on the river. These two parks, right after they were built, they had $1 billion in private investment within just 2 blocks of those parks. And here's Chattanooga. Before we talk about resiliency in Chattanooga, I first want to just say that Nancy and I had the great pleasure today of actually talking via Zoom with the former mayor of Chattanooga. And he was talking to us about his efforts prior to being mayor, when he was involved in helping formulate the strategy for redeveloping the riverfront, but then also helping to facilitate the implementation of the plans that were developed in creating the riverfront that we have today in Chattanooga. I love talking about Chattanooga partly because in the 1960s, the Chattanooga was identified as the city with the worst air pollution in the United States. They were tremendous pollution in the city, and also they were a city in economic decline. And they decided, we have this asset, we have this river, we have this riverfront that we can turn into a public asset where the public can access the river and provide this public space along both banks of the river. And we can use this as a tool to revitalize our downtown and reimagine this city and what it can be. And if you've been there today, it's resulted in tremendous economic growth and development in their downtown. They have a tremendous tourism industry now and business in Chattanooga. And I think what's really cool too is I just read that just a few years ago, the American Lung Association actually now listed Chattanooga as one of the cleanest cities in America. So they've literally gone from the worst to one of the cleanest cities in America, and also created this wonderful riverfront that I would encourage anybody to go and enjoy, because it's really cool how they've incorporated public spaces. They have lots of parks, obviously, but also cultural spaces like museums, and then lots of restaurants and other public amenities along the waterfront. And this is an example too, where they took a former brownfield, and this is a more recent park where they took a former industrial site and have actually turned it into a recreational amenity that provides environmental benefits. This park is designed to capture stormwater to prevent flooding in surrounding areas. So you can see this little weir system down here. It's essentially a man-made wetland system that slows down the water and allows the water to be treated before it actually makes its way out into the river, but then also provides recreational benefits for the community. And another thing that you're seeing as a trend with these parks is that this recognition that water is going to win if we're in a battle against water and where it's going to go. And this is an acknowledgement that we have to work with nature as opposed to against it. And so these parks now are designed literally to flood. This is a great example of a park along the Buffalo Bayou in Houston, where you can see this park was designed with the idea that it will flood, because they know it will. And all of the amenities in this park are designed to be able to be cleaned up and to quickly return back into a recreational amenity for the community. And so what this does too is it helps to prevent flooding in the surrounding urban areas. So it's become a driver for economic growth. It helps prevent flooding in the urban areas and creates a more resilient community, frankly, and then also provides these outstanding recreational benefits for the citizens of Houston. And then Nancy mentioned Smale Park earlier. Again, another park. It's built in a floodplain, designed to flood. As you can see, this is the park underwater. As you notice, the development that Nancy referenced before, the Banks development, is behind the area that is actually flooded here. So that's protected from the flooding. The park floods, but then again, it's also designed with the idea that it will flood. They know that it'll happen eventually. It's in a floodplain, and yet it's designed so that it can then return quickly to being a recreational amenity such as you see here.
And I'm going to bring you back to Florida, but before I go on, Louisville literally last week just flooded. And so they have that buffer that is available. And there's some pictures which I need to find where there's some buildings that weren't in the buffer and they're flooded. So, two cities in Jacksonville that we feel are particularly comparable in Florida, that we feel are particularly comparable to Jacksonville, are Tampa and St. Petersburg. And if you haven't been there recently, you need to go, because 20 years ago, those cities were where we were in the year 2000, and they are booming. One of the reasons is their investment, again, in their public spaces. So what you're looking at here is on the west side of the Hillsborough River. It's called Julian B. Lane Riverfront Park, 25 acres. And it was a park, and then they reinvested in their park. And part of what they did when they went to the community is this community engagement process. And this is one of the things that we have been trying to convey, that any riverfront plan, which is what we're asking for, needs to have a robust community engagement process. And what they did here is they went to the community and said, what do you want in your park? And this community on that side of the river really wanted active parks, which means ball fields. So they have tennis courts, they have soccer fields, they have, what you're looking at here is a performance boathouse. So they have crew races, and they have paddle boats and things that in this little cove area, you can learn about how to do it without getting into the currents of the river. It also, of course, has this big space which has event space and picnic areas. And then across the river is this smaller park. I liken it to our landing space because it's 8 acres. It's right next to the Performing Arts Center in Tampa, right along, kind of right the heart of Tampa. And it's along their Riverwalk, but it's a space that draws lots of people to events. And just because of the location, you can see across the river, that's University of Tampa there. And here's just a couple of visions of their Riverwalk. So their Riverwalk is wider. It has more design elements to it. Again, you see these, these benches, swinging benches that make it enjoyable to use with shade. And even their Riverwalk here, this is a little, there's place for a food truck. Our Riverwalk, we don't even have place for a food truck if we wanted to put it there. And then what Tampa also did is they extended their Riverwalk down to this old industrial area that was nothing. And now today, this is Armature Works. This is a private entity, so it's a food hall, it has restaurants, it has all sorts of things, but you can see in the front here, this is this open space that the view on the right is if you're in the public market looking at the river, and then they're extending their Riverwalk. If you see over here, they're continuing to extend it. So this is, this is a 15-minute walk from downtown. A lot of people say, oh, Metropolitan Park is so far away. Well, if you're in Tampa, you will walk that because there's lots along the way. And then 30 minutes to the south, you have St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg has 6 waterfront districts, and they have a master plan that covers all 6. So the pier is one of the 6 districts. And this is not really a pier, it's a pier park because it's 26 acres. They spent $92 million on it, but they expect an annual impact of $80 million. And I was here last July. My daughter lives down here. And so I get to visit. I visited both of these cities recently, and just people galore. There's 3 restaurants at the pier. There's a discovery center. There's a beach. This is a wetlands area right within the pier. As they also have a major piece of public art, which is very experiential. So it's kind of like the Chicago Bean, where you go there and you see it differently every time you see it. This was privately funded, the sculpture. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is none of these projects had like a straight line, right? They all had their ups and downs and challenges, trying to get approval, trying to get city community engagement. But St. Pete was impressive because they embarked on a master planning effort with a robust community engagement, and they continue to do it. They continue to do visioning exercises and engagement. And this is one of the points we've been really trying to make with our city is there's just too much cynicism around community engagement. And it's not easy to do, but we just have to do it because that way you get buy-in from the community. And we had to cut out many parks. So while we showed you a bunch of parks, there are many other mid-sized cities in the US. This doesn't even count things in other parts of the world that are investing recently in major public investment in their riverfront park systems. And so, somebody asked about the groundwork and the Emerald Trail system. We are in full support of the Emerald Trail. I think it can't be built fast enough. I would like to see it be built in 5 years. I know Kay has talked about that. I think it's possible if we put our minds to it. And, it's got a master plan. I mean, here's an example where they created a master plan. It was adopted by the city council, and now it is being built, leg by leg by leg, with a public-private partnership, with Groundworks taking the lead on design, and then the city providing funding. It's working. And what it will do is it will allow all of these communities access to the St. Johns River. They're going to be able to easily get on a bike, get on a scooter, walk down to the riverfront. And our vision is that once they're at the riverfront, there needs to be a major public place for them to go where you don't have to spend money if you don't want to. There would be opportunities, obviously, to do so. And so we come back to the opportunity, and we focused mostly on the North Bank, and here's the shipyards, but also there's Metropolitan Park, because that's where the available city-owned land is. A lot of cities, if they want to do something like this, they are constrained by the land. They have to go buy the land. We don't have to buy the land. We can use it for our to invest in ourselves. And here's just one, early rendering of what a park system could be. Our vision is to create a master plan with community engagement. So we have not been prescriptive on exactly what should be in the park. We think the community should help decide that. We are in support of cultural institutions that can go together and attract people and give them more things to do. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on investment, but and return. But the point is that there have been studies in other cities that have shown that $1 invested returns $6 to $40 back to the community, because it accelerates downtown revitalization. It provides events, activity. Residents have a higher quality of life. You have to spend less money, paying developers to build there because they're attracted to that kind of quality public space. And then, the avoidance costs of resiliency efforts is really uncalculable at this point. But to fund it, it doesn't go on any one source. There's grants, there's tax increment district, there's also some revenue that you can get, like that Boathouse in Tampa is rented out for weddings. It's a source of their revenue because it's so attractive. And again, somebody's got, is that, I don't think that's me, is it? This again is another view of the same available land that we have in front of us, and with the co-benefits that Jimmy talked about, economic impact, resiliency, recreation, health and wellness. There's so many studies that talk about urban parks that are the benefit for the urban communities. And so we ask ourselves, what will it take? We feel strongly that there needs to be a riverfront master plan. The city leaders right now are not necessarily on that same page, but there are planning efforts going on. We'll talk a little bit about that. We feel strongly that the public needs to be involved and shared. And this is one of the reasons why we're doing these community things, is we feel like the community conversation needs to happen. And if the city's not going to do it, then we're going to do it. And the city is starting, DuPont has started an effort, which I think will be very positive. But again, prioritizing the public and committing to excellence. You have to do this right. And I've seen this, watching the Emerald Trail do their work. They are committed to doing it top quality. And that is what's going to, really make it the difference at the end of the day. And then finally, the support from the community. So we are looking for people to support this effort. We ask you can stay informed and spread the word. We're on all of our social medias. We have a newsletter. You can sign up for that at the end of our website. Occasionally we'll have call to action requests, depending on if there's a disposition of property that if they're, coming down the pike, which could happen. And then thirdly, send us, and we can discuss right now, feedback and ideas. But again, this is a grassroots effort. We are facilitating, or we'd like to see ourselves as raising this up for the community to say, hey, this land is our land, taxpayer land. What should we do with this? And really be thoughtful about it, because what we decide, what our city leaders decide today is going to define the next 100 years. And if we go back to the original slide, which is of Memorial Park was built in 1924. So it has been there 100 years, and it has provided enjoyment for people, and people of all walks of life come to Memorial Park. It's only 6 acres. It's in Riverside. It's really was designed as more of a neighborhood park. But if you do it well, like this was designed by the Olmsted brothers, so it's got a beautiful design, it will provide value for a century. And so with that, I'm going to stop, and we can answer questions and have a conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy and Jimmy. Appreciate your well thought out and great presentation. You're looking for coalition members, I presume. The greater number of citizens who are with you, the more clout you have. Is that an accurate statement?
Mhm.
Well, I hope at the end of this meeting that you will consider including the First Coast Free Thought Society as one of your great supporters in all of the things that you present to the public, because I don't think there's anybody here who would disagree with you that we need parks. The question is, how do we do it? And so I have a dozen questions for you, but before I start asking my questions, I'd like to open it up to anybody here. If you can show your hand or somehow let me know that you have a question, and if you don't, I'll get the ball rolling. Anybody have a question? David Schwambert does.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned that there seems to be a bit of resistance on the part of city leaders. Are there any city leaders, people will say on the city council, who are unequivocally for this, who are really pushing for it?
I think unequivocally, I would say no, because I think the challenge, I mean, I really do think, David, the challenge that we're faced here is there's this mindset in Jacksonville that the development community should drive the process, or frankly, that we've allowed that to happen, so that that's been the kind of status quo in Jacksonville, is that they come to us, and it's a very reactionary approach, to riverfront development. It's like, hey, they come up with the idea, they pitch their idea, and we react to it, and we consider these development projects essentially in isolation. It's piecemeal development, and so and also we have bought into this idea that the only way you can make this development work is you have to essentially subsidize private development to make it economically viable and help them get a leg up so that these development projects can work. So it's a paradigm shift. And that's been one of the challenges, is trying to get city council members and other leaders in the community to think, hey, you know what? Parks and public infrastructure can actually be a form of incentives that can be much more effective. And, kind of our reaction, I think Nancy and I would say, is we haven't tried that approach before. Why not? Because the old approach doesn't seem to be working very well, and so, but unfortunately, it's been a challenge to get people to think a little differently about parks and the role that they play in revitalization, and then actually understanding all of those co-benefits that we laid out today.
And I would answer it a little bit different. I think the fact that there is conversation happening, especially at the DIA level, they had a workshop 2 weeks ago about the riverfront. And the fact that it's happening is a direct result of this grassroots effort. And it's not that the riverfront hasn't been ever a focus. Mayor Payton had a plan. There have been plans in the past to activate the water and to do things, but and we do have some, I would say we do have some city council support. We definitely have people who are thinking in this direction. It's always kind of somebody asked, how do we get there? And I meant to talk a little bit more, but about 2 weeks ago, the DuPont Fund has announced that they are embarking on a study. It's not a master plan, but it's a study that will help inform the public spaces and what kinds of activities and things to do. And they are in the early stages of defining what that is. So I can't speak that intelligently about it, but it's a 6 to 8 month process. It will include community engagement. And so that is a hopeful sign. Of course, DuPont, has resources and credibility. And so we will be participating in that to the extent that we've been asked to. And so that is, I think that is a really positive development, because, that's one of the things we've been asking for, is to take a step up a little bit. Let's get some expertise from, design firms and urban planning firms who have done this in other areas. This is not, lots of other cities have had these challenges, and we've got such a great opportunity in front of us.
Well, Jacksonville city leaders have put the jail downtown very close to the riverfront. The Schulzbacher Center does great work, but it's also downtown very close to the riverfront, which also invites a lot of homeless people downtown to where the parks are. Are you addressing some of those issues? We can't move the jail, it's there. But what about the homeless people? How would you address that?
Well, every city has homeless issues, and if you have a homeless problem, you need to deal with the homeless problem. And as Cindy, as Dawn Gilman said of changing homelessness, she said the solution to homelessness is housing. And so that has actually been a big topic at the mayor's task force in the last few weeks. If you're following along in the news, Sulzbacher has announced that they would like to go move outside of their location, move somewhere else. There's been talk about moving the jail. It's interesting to me, the landing has been vacant now for a year and a half, and I don't see any tents or homeless people at the landing. It's not a foregone conclusion. And so you do have to have you have to have people in the parks. You have to have people, that is an important piece. And even Metropolitan Park, there's no homeless people down there right now, even though it's been vacant for a long time. So I'm not saying there wouldn't be. It's just that if you have a homeless problem as a city, and you can't tell me that Chattanooga and Nashville and Memphis and Tampa, none of them have homeless problems. They do. But you need to create a park that is exciting and attractive for people to come and visit, and for all people to come and visit.
Oh, thank you. I think Earl has a question. Earl, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for a great program tonight. I'm curious about all these parks, if there's any discussion about making them more than just human friendly, making as much as possible, creating ecosystems for birds and lots of other animals, homes for animals, homes for birds, plants that will feed birds. Any discussion about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing about one of the benefits too about urban parks is they can actually provide some much needed habitat that we need for wildlife too. So, I mean, there can be where both benefit, humans and wildlife. And I think for us, we haven't said it needs to be one way or the other necessarily, because we're advocating for a public process that involves the public so they can help decide what type of amenities should be included in the park. But I mean, I think I could speak on behalf of our group that I think just about all of our members would say that should be certainly considered, is that we need natural areas. Matter of fact, it's kind of funny because, if you look at the Tampa park that Nancy had the presentation, that's not exactly what a lot of us individually would like to see along the waterfront as ball fields, but that's what Tampa wanted. That's what the public wanted. And I think that's part of the process, is it has to be a shared vision. But at the same time, I think it's also imperative that the public, if that public process is available for us to participate, that we have to advocate for those type of things where we can actually incorporate. And you're seeing this in other cities too, by the way. I think it's really interesting. There's a concept now called rewilding you may have seen in other cities. And I was reading a great article about Barcelona, for instance, and they're literally trying to rewild Barcelona, Spain, where they're incorporating bee houses and all of these different things, because we know we've lost habitat and the biodiversity of this planet is in serious decline, and that our parks can actually help us in terms of supporting biodiversity while also making us more resilient, while also providing recreational opportunities for humans. So I think that's the thing about these parks, is that especially if they're of the right size, that's the thing I think that we need to emphasize here, is we're not talking about just pocket parks. What we've seen is, and you've seen in these presentations tonight, a lot of these parks are really big, and you need that size to, one, provide a diversity of recreational opportunities for the public, but also it gives you more opportunity to create more resilient parks that can help buffer your cities, but also provide that necessary habitat that we need in our urban environments.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Thank you for your question, Earl. You want to follow up, or are you okay?
Yeah, I just think it's important that even if the public wants ball fields and soccer fields, that something needs to be set aside for habitats for birds and animals to be able to live and eat food.
Thank you. Fred, I see you have your hand up, I think. Fred?
Yeah, of course, in Metropolitan Park, if you just a few years ago, that was flooded. And so that, that statue was in the midst of a big flood where you couldn't see anything else except that statue. And I think it's back in 2005, downtown was seriously flooded. Is that being brought to the attention, the reminder of the, the city leaders? They say, hey, they say the problem is not going to, you may not, be rare, but it still happens. And of course, San Marco has been, been seeing a serious flooding also. Many of these areas right around, the riverfront, and even further inland, because just a heavy rain, there've been heavy flooding in my area, just north of the stadium.
Yeah, and I think the thing, Fred, that's interesting is, parks alone aren't going to just protect our city. Obviously, when we talk about resiliency, I want to make sure that everybody understands we're not saying that it's going to prevent flooding altogether, But what it does do is it does help to at least alleviate some of those impacts of flooding and storm surge and things like that. And I think, just as we showed that New York City and Boston realized how they're really vulnerable from after Hurricane Sandy, we obviously as a city, hopefully, have recognized that we're extremely vulnerable to sea level rise and future storms after Irma. And yes, that's going to become more frequent in the future. And I think that one of the reasons that we have to look to parks, because that's something that's a trend across the country, is people are looking to, as I mentioned, the term green infrastructure or natural infrastructure. They're looking to these natural infrastructure solutions to help buffer us from future storms, because the gray infrastructure solutions like raising up bulkheads and putting in pump systems, that alone is not going to protect us. It's probably going to be a combination of both, but we have to look to these natural solutions that then, as we talked about earlier, can also provide habitat benefits, can also provide recreational benefits and things like that, that the gray infrastructure solutions just can't provide.
It's a fascinating term to me, designed to flood. I'm not sure I've heard it before, and I wonder if that could be a new marketing campaign for San Marco. Just claim that we're designed to flood. Holland might benefit from that. We're designed to flood, Hey, that's the way it is. We're designed this way. Other questions? Anybody? Other hands up? If not, somebody? Anybody? Questions? Comments? Questions or comments? Anybody here oppose parks? Nobody opposes parks.
I have a comment.
Kate.
Hi, my name's Kate Hurlbut. I'm the president of ICSIO, which is the local chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And that's why we were meeting, myself and our Chad Scott, our conservation person, we're meeting with Nancy about us joining the coalition and sort of addressing the question about wild areas for the wildlife. Having those green, I was just looking up green bulkheads, having plants instead of cement right where the water is going to encourage wildlife, birds in particular. But we're looking down the road when things actually start being designed of getting native plants in there, because they take less fertilizer. You don't need to use pesticides and herbicides, and they support wildlife better. So that's, down the road, that's something that we'd like to help contribute is getting some native plants in there, not just big lawns.
Well, that's
Yanela. I'm sorry.
Like what you were talking about, Katie, is like this idea of natural shorelines, those type of things, like you said, they can provide this habitat, but the thing that they do better than, like, say, seawalls is that they do a better job of absorbing the energy from storm surge, so that the storm surge does not go as far into the urban core. And so they can actually help to take away some of that energy and help reduce the impact of storms as well, especially if that's designed to do, in that way. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunities with parks, I think, in natural shorelines. Now, there are limitations. I just want to make sure that's clear, that we just can't have necessarily a natural shoreline all the way along the river, because some areas in downtown it's really deep. So you can't have that gradual slope into the river from the shoreline. But there's opportunities, like in other communities that they've done things with oyster beds that can help absorb that energy from storms and things like that, that can be natural features that are really cool. There's just so many opportunities that I think we're seeing now as engineers are really looking to nature. And the ultimate R&D, right, is nature. Been spending millions of years perfecting these natural processes. We need to learn from that and how we can benefit from that ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Yanela, go right ahead.
So I'm a resident of downtown. I live in the Cathedral District. So I'm so excited. We're talking like this, but you're preaching to the choir basically in this, presentation. And I'm trying to, bring people in. Like I live in a community of 51 townhomes. And I want people to get excited and support the Riverkeeper. Like, I think it should be mandatory. If you live in Jacksonville, you have to belong to the Riverkeeper. So what can I do? What can we do? Like I found this meeting tonight by accident, basically. And so like, we need to reach more people. We need to, you know where I'm coming from. I want the public to be more aware of this coalition. I've been talking to the people at the church that I go to, and many of them are very conscientious about nature. It's a Unitarian Universalist church. But there's, a million people out there that, can we put signs out at the town center or something?
Yeah, so that's a constant point of discussion is how can we expand this effort? How can we get the awareness out? We just started our social media about a month ago.
Okay.
We're all got Jimmy, he's got his job with a Riverkeeper, and so we are. A couple weeks ago, we did an urban hike. So our coalition is 10 organizations, and we just did it as a test to just see what it would be like to start at Metropolitan Park and then go over to the landing and back. And we're going to do a few more of those kind of in person now that COVID is getting a little bit, the lights at the end of the tunnel. A lot of people are getting vaccinated. We're going to be able to do some more in-person things. I would encourage everybody to kind of, there's a couple of events at the landing in April, go down there and be in that space and see it, because, in the landing, the current plan is to put in like 8 to 10 story buildings in either corner of the landing. And, there's, maybe there's a different way that landing should be developed. There's a design competition for it. There's some other parks that are being, kind of designed. There is a commitment that we heard from Lori Boyer to extend the Riverwalk from the landing or from the Hyatt to Metropolitan Park.
Right.
Again, I think was a strategic mistake. We never did that, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
That's right.
But so supporting those kinds of efforts are going to be really important. And we don't really have a decision point. There's not a yet, but things happen every week. There seems to be something that happens, right?
Yeah.
And so staying on top of, we try to communicate via social media, email marketing, and these kinds of events. And so, right now, what our experience is, we're open to, input is the city council is important. But if there's not a decision that they have to make, so writing to your city council in support of this is good. What we're hearing a lot right now is, parks are good, but development and parks go together, which we agree on, but we feel like the development needs to be away from the river, not right up to the river. And so that's kind of the conversation. That's probably what you'll hear is, yes, we support parks, but which is being prioritized? Are we prioritizing the development, or are we really prioritizing the public space? And are we willing to invest in that? And we can't design, we're not designing a park right now because we don't know what the boundaries are. And we want to have those boundaries defined so that, so that we see that there is a commitment to the public lands. And And so that's kind of a work in progress. I'm probably not answering your question, but we
No,
are.
no, you are. And the other thing is that it's so important to keep at the forefront the fact that you can use the parks to control the flooding and to help the urban areas, you know, reduce that impact. I mean, it's coming. Didn't they say that the water is going to rise? We were just flooded not that long ago, all the way up to Bay Street. It was water.
Yeah.
So we need to keep that at the forefront of every discussion, that you can't be building right on top of the water. Remember the flood? What year was that?
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
you know, let me say that, I mean, anytime you're involved with advocacy, it's can be frustrating because, you know, you're trying to build that critical mass to where that it actually influences decision makers to hopefully, you know, do what we think is the right thing to do. And so it can be frustrating when you see that, you know, you feel like you're banging your head against the wall. But at the same time, I do think that, you know, public input can and will have a difference. I do think, honestly, this initiative with Riverfront Parks Now there's more of a conversation about parks now than there was before. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think we're recognizing the importance of it. I'll even say on resiliency, 3 years ago, I remember we decided, Riverkeeper, to start a River Rising town hall series that we did about resiliency after the Times Union came out with a story about the impacts of dredging and how it increases water levels and potentially our susceptibility to storm surge. And we did a town hall series, and people weren't even talking about resiliency. And, you know, I was talking about it's become kind of a buzzword. Well, it certainly wasn't a buzzword 3 years ago. In Jacksonville, people had no clue what we were talking about. Now we've had a mayor that actually has put in a budget to have a chief resiliency officer. We're doing a vulnerability assessment of the city right now of our vulnerability to sea level rise and storm surge. And we just concluded a very robust public series of resiliency committee meetings that involved the public in helping to develop some really exciting recommendations for city council. And that was in the span of 3 years. In Jacksonville, Florida, as somebody who's a native, that is extremely fast to have something that quickly in Jacksonville. And I know a lot of you probably share that same feeling. Things don't happen quickly in Jacksonville. And that actually, there's been quite a change of heart in terms of resiliency in Jacksonville in a very relatively short period of time.
I think Nancy mentioned something about the return on investment. With every dollar that we invest in parks, we either get $6 to $40 back on a return on investment. I'm not sure where those numbers come from, but for the purposes of this discussion, let's accept them as factual. What is the return on investment comparatively if we did away with parks and just built condos and office space?
Well, I'll just give you two examples of what we just did. On the courthouse property, they awarded that land to Spandrel to build, I don't know, 300 residences, apartments, and a restaurant. And they gave the land to them. Okay, the land was, you know, $1, and of course that transaction hasn't closed yet, so it's still in the term sheets are being negotiated. But that was part of it, was that they would get the land for free. And then the second piece is they would give them certain amount of incentives per, you know, unit, residential unit. So a lot of these are tax incentives so that they don't have to pay the incremental increase in the tax value of the land. So that's one property. And so we're paying developers to take the land away, you know, to take the land away. And of course we support residential development downtown, but one of the best things that's happening are inland downtown. There's a lot of renovations of the Federal Reserve building, of the Laura Street Trio, the Barnett building. So we see it as perfectly complementary. If you have a park 3 blocks from you, that is an amenity for you. You don't always have to be right there on the river. The second property is the River City Brewing site. So that site, it used to be a public park. It's now, it had a 99-year lease. There's a company related group that wants to build 8-story residential apartments, takes up most of the land there. And again, it would be the city gives them the money, the property for $1. Then they give them tax incentives. And so that's kind of the prevailing approach, which has happened in Brooklyn and other places, is they get developer incentives. So we're not opposed to that. It's just that you just have to make sure if that's all we're doing and we're not investing in our public, we feel like we can do both. In places like St. Petersburg, the developers, they don't have to pay the developers to build, because they're building high rises 3 blocks from the riverfront, because it's so attractive, and they've got 20 somethings dying to live there with high rents. And so that's the goal, is to be in a place where developers are seeking us out, because we have such a great, and we have a better riverfront than almost any other city that we've seen. I mean, the Hillsborough River in Tampa, it's not great. You know, the Chattanooga River is not great, but we've got a beautiful river.
I think Susan has a question. Am I correct? Are you there, Susan? Oh, maybe she did, and I don't know. She's not there any
No,
longer.
I'm here. I had.
Oh, okay, Susan, you're on.
Oh yeah. So my question is, this is so exciting. I just feel like we're going to do it. I love the other cities. I just hope you can show this to everybody in Jacksonville. And I was wondering if you have a comment on Matt Carlucci's editorial in the Times-Union. He talked about Metro Park being abandoned, which was kind of ironic in a way, since it was the city council and the mayor that has abandoned the park. So I thought that was kind of funny. But anyways, are the Jaguars now happy about developing the Metro Park for, helping us develop it to make it available to everybody rather than just a couple of billionaires? Or what is your thoughts on that?
I think it's too early to tell. And I think we probably best not comment on city council. There is no proposal right now. There's been no proposal submitted to the DIA. There's talk. They've talked a lot about what they want to do. And so until there's a proposal, I don't think we can react. I think that, because we don't know what the public investment is going to be required. And that was the big deal with Lot J, right? And so we were not opposed to Lot J, at least the concept of building in Lot J. That's where the building should be, across the street from Bay Street. And the deal itself was bad, so we don't know anything about what this deal is going to be. We do have concerns about giving up a perfectly good park for a development, because whatever happens then, let's say they replace the park for the shipyards. Now, number one, they've got to replace equal value and quality. And what is that going to cost? And is the city really going to do that? Would be one question. And then secondly, then the next billionaire comes along and wants to have Friendship Fountain. Are we going to give that one up too? So we have a problem with the valuable riverfront land. We know that parks sometimes have to move, but when you're talking riverfront land, most cities are adding public riverfront land, not giving it away. And like in Denver, I was reading about Denver's park planning. They don't have enough green space to serve the needs of their growing residential community. So, as far as which politician is supporting it or not, there is no proposal yet to support. So we're just not clear on what exactly is happening. We would like to see more transparency as to what is the plan, and are we really going to just let our whole riverfront be planned around one developer? We know, for example, that there are 3 other developers making plans for the riverfront, not just Iguana. And so what are those? And let's get them all out on the table, and let's talk about the riverfront.
Well, that brings me to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, do you know who these developers are, and have you solicited them directly?
We know, we know of them, and we talked with Iguana last year. We talked with a couple people, and we don't feel it's our place to make any kind of deal about, oh, well, we'll support their plan if X, Y, and Z, because we feel this is riverfront land that the public needs to weigh in on. And while we represent a lot of organizations, we feel this is a bigger issue than that. And so who are the stewards of the public land? It's you and me, and the city council should be representing that and looking ahead for the public benefit that can help drive private development. So that's, again, it's misguided to think it's an either or.
In terms of city council, you say write to them and let them know. Is there something on your website that suggests what should be written and how often you would like it to be written?
We've been focusing more on the DIA because they're the first line of decision making. But we should probably put something together. We've actually thought about putting together a petition, which I think is something that we have to just write it in the right way. But that's something that we have talked about.
Is there a petition that could actually have some sort of enforcement, like getting an initiative on a ballot? Is that what you would like to do? Something? Have you thought through going to maybe the ballot initiative locally?
We haven't thought about that, but that's actually not a bad idea. To do a referendum. I mean, I don't know. We have to raise money to figure that out, but city. That's what Scenic Jacksonville did with the tree initiative. Back in the day, was we created a charter amendment that changed the charter.
Right. Well, it's not cheap to do it, but you might find that people are so eager to have what you're offering, what your vision is, that you might find the donations flow in. Maybe that's possible. And it's also a lot of work to do that.
Yeah, and I just want to add also, as far as maintenance goes, one of the things, and I think this is really following the good model that Groundworks has created, is to develop kind of a Riverfront Parks Conservancy, nonprofit organization that can really help maintain, improve, work with Downtown Vision on that aspect of, because people we don't have the best track record as far as maintaining our parks. And the best one is right now is Memorial Park in Riverside, and they have a private organization that helps work in concert with the Parks Department in a public-private partnership. So that's another thing that we are looking at forming.
Carrie has a question, I think. Carrie.
Nancy, twice you have said DIA.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know what that stands for.
Okay, so our city government, the Downtown Investment Authority is like the downtown's planning department. So our city government has two planning departments. So one for downtown and one for everything outside of downtown. And so it's a different process. But the Downtown Investment Authority, Lori Boyer is a former councilwoman. You might remember her name. She runs it, and it's supposed to be an independent board. It has a board. It has a staff. She reports to the mayor, and they're entrusted with developing downtown. And that has been in place maybe for about 10 years. It's gone through different iterations over the years, but they're the first line. Like if you remembered the Lot J discussions, they kept saying, why didn't the Downtown Investment Authority, why didn't this go there first? And so they're the first people that look at evaluations, they look at proposals, they evaluate them, and then they vote on them. And often the decisions then still have to go to city council if it involves public investment, or certain types of dispositions of land would all have to also go through city council. But the city council has entrusted those responsibilities to that organization. So they meet on a monthly basis. Their meeting this week is on Wednesday, the third Wednesday of every month. So we follow those agendas. And if there's something on the agenda, like there was a few weeks ago, the resolution to help, try to test in Metropolitan Park, those are examples of the calls to action that we might send out saying, support this, oppose that, come speak at the meeting, write a letter. They have heard us loud and clear. And it's an organization that, wasn't really used to a whole lot of public input, because they would just, not that many people would show up to their meetings, but now people are watching and showing up, and that's a good thing. I think that's just a public accountability to see what's happening.
What is the time frame on this? What is the sense of urgency here?
Well, these developer proposals, we expect a second one to come out pretty soon, within the next month, that has to do with the riverfront. We don't know what Iguana's plans are. They've been at this now for 7 years. So there's a different plan all the time, but we know they're shopping it around. And so it could happen. I mean, this is what happens. It can get submitted at any time, and then boom, it's on the docket for evaluation. So I think it would be within the next, there's conducting testing right now, maybe in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. And then the DuPont Fund project is a 6 to 8 month project. So, some people are saying, let's wait for that to be completed before we make these major decisions. That just kind of depends on what developers, anybody can go and do a unsolicited proposal. They can just, say, I want this piece of land, I want to do this. And then the DIA has to evaluate it. So it's the next 6 months is going to be a critical point in our history.
Okay, that's not a long ways away. Steve has a question. Unmute yourself, Steve.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Speckelmeyer. I'm the past chairman of the Veterans Council of Duval County. I represented 60 veteran services organization that belongs to us. I was also the past president of the presidents of the 5 veterans councils of Baker, Clay, Duval, Nassau, and St. Johns County. I'm currently on the board of directors for the POW MIA Memorial at Cecil Field. I'm chairman of the support committee for the Jacksonville National Cemetery. And I'm also the field operations coordinator for Missing in America project, where we inter the remains of veterans, spouses, and dependent children, usually with no next of kin, that have been in funeral homes for decades. And we cover all 9 national cemeteries in the state of Florida. But my question to you is, has anybody thought about the veterans naming anything or a piece of ground down there or a sliver of a veterans park? When I was, we went through the thing, I was the one that mentioned the Veterans Park along with Bob Aldeheim when they named the park at Hemming Plaza James Weldon Johnson. And we have suggested that they named it Veterans Park. But we understood that because we have the diversity in all of our veterans ranks. So that was fine. But at the same time, Mr. Dennis also said that, hey, we can build a veterans park somewhere. So I feel that somewhere along the line here, and I know Justin Wakelin's on here, and I saw the Naval Museum, we would certainly like to see something down there. But what bothers me, Nancy, is I see this stuff and I see the outlines, but I understand marsh is going in there, but nobody shows where there could be a possibility of a piece of that park along that riverfront all the way to Metropolitan Park. I have yet to see that.
Well, so there is no plan, right? So that's part of what we are advocating for, is to do a master plan. And that's what a master plan would do. But we don't feel like we don't have the capabilities of making those determinations of which puzzle pieces go where. The veterans are a very important part of our community. And it would not be, it would be complimentary to have part of the park be a veterans section. I mean, of course, the Orlick is going to be at least in Pier 1, it might be in a different pier. And so it's not determined. And Mosh is, they just announced that they want to go onto the north side. They don't have a location yet, that they have a desired location, but it's not set yet. And so that's what we've been saying, is let's step back and look at this, and let's not just put puzzle pieces here and here, and which communities are important to us. We know we want things where kids and young families can go, and the Orlick will provide some of that. And what other activities do people want to do? Well, honoring veterans is an important piece, but that's part of that community engagement that we feel hasn't yet been done. And that the DuPont will provide some of that, and we're hoping to influence that. But again, this is, we're not prescribing, we're not designing the park, and we're not prescribing where things are. But we also know that if you want a place for veterans, and you want a place for parks, and you want to have mosh, and you want to have art things, you got to have enough land. And so let's not give this land away, and let's be thoughtful about future. I mean, anything would be built probably in phases. You know, the Emerald Trail is being built in phases. You wouldn't build it all at one time. But if we allow private development to take over too much land on the riverfront, now we're saying private development can still invest inland. So again, it's not an either or. And so again, that's it. I'm not answering your question, but it's because we're not at that point. Our group is not designing the park. And
Well, and that's the thing.
Could you tell us what Orlick is for those of us that don't know?
I think we'll let Justin do that.
Justin might do
That's
that.
correct.
That'd be best.
Thanks, Nancy.
We'll get to John after your response. Okay, Justin? Go ahead, Justin. Thank you.
You're on mute, Justin. We can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Maybe Steve.
No, Justin, we can hear you. Now we can't hear you. Okay.
John?
Yeah, my observation of working with Parks and Recreation for years in North Carolina, studied Olmsted's design for an urban park and what happened in and around New York because of it. Also, when we put the Intrepid in New York, it was a multi-faceted Veterans Affair thing. So a lot of this that we're talking about is having green space, having wetlands protected, and then if you go the Orlick in, having some different static affair displays other than strictly Navy. So it's everybody can be happy with that, but we have to protect the waterfront from anything and everything. And if you look at all these places that you showed, the cities that developed their waterfront for flood control and for recreation, all of that leads to development farther back from the river. And the farther back from the river, the better the water will be and the better water control and less flooding. If we build the buildings right up to the waterfront, they will put up larger and higher bulkheads, which will cause flooding downstream. And it's a crazy system that we let developers get away with. And I appreciate what you guys are doing and behind you 100%.
So Justin, can we hear you now? Can you try to talk again?
Microphone's not working.
Can't hear you.
And Justin, I'm not going to do this justice for you because your mic's not working, but I'm going to just say that for those that don't know, because I'm definitely not.
No.
Yeah. Oh, wait.
You there?
Try again, Justin. Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we hear you.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go.
No.
Okay, I took out my headphone. Apparently my mic's not working. Hey, so good evening. I'm Justin Wakelin with the Jacksville Naval Museum. I'm the vice president of our group. As you know, we've been trying to get the USS Adams here for about 12 years. The Navy said no to bringing the Adams. So 2 years ago, the Orlick folks got a hold of us and said, hey, you all have a great city, great piers, and we have no place to put our ship. So that's where we're at. We have an ordinance that's working up the chain to hopefully be approved in June. So once that's approved, we will bring over the USS Orlick Museum ship, and and establish the Jacksonville Naval Museum. The location, as Nancy pointed out, right now in the ordinance is Pier number 1. It's near that building that's a skeleton of a building. If anybody's familiar with the shipyards area, there's that empty looking building. It's right near there. That building's supposed to come down soon, by the way, very slowly, which is unfortunate. But eventually, from DIA, they do want to try to find a permanent location for our museum ship and our museum. Where that is, I have no idea. No idea. Couldn't tell you. That's down the road. I do have to go back in 3 years to DDRB and present further for a permanent location or creating a actual museum building, which, you know, is in our long-term plans.
Thank you, Justin.
And I think too, like just kind of following up real quick with Justin and Steve. I mean, I think that's the thing that I want to just, Nancy said, and I want to reiterate, is that we don't see ourselves as a group that is advocating for a specific plan in terms of where everything should be located and what all of those amenities should include. Now, we have all of us as a part of this coalition have our own ideas of what we'd like to see in a riverfront park that is that prioritizes public access. But I think that's where these other cities, I mean, this is critical. All of these other cities who have done it very successfully have done it with a master plan that was developed first with a community visioning process that involved the public so that this is a shared community vision. As I mentioned, talking with the Chattanooga mayor, they went through an extensive public process in the late 80s and 90s. And they're in their 3rd iteration of this. They're updating their plan constantly. And so what they did is the former mayor said, is that what he's found and what he's seen in other cities, it's critical that the public has buy-in in this and has ownership of this, or there's not going to be the support. And you're also going to end up with what we have now, which is it's kind of like a free-for-all. Everybody's fighting for a piece of the riverfront, whether it be developers or other interests, and it should be done in a planned fashion so that it incorporates the desires and the needs of the public. And that includes resiliency, that includes recreation, and that includes opportunities to attract development. And so I think it can be done. And then that gives us also a platform for people like Riverfront Parks Now and Justin and his group to actually have that community dialogue, which we need to have.
Any other comments or questions?
Question about the Berkman Plaza and where the garage collapsed back in 2007, and they've finally took several years to clear the debris, but the condo has been unfinished. Now I've walked along there, just south of there along the riverside, going through the Berkman Plaza and into this grassy lot, which on the other side of the coffee place, I can't think of the name of it, but Maxwell Coffee place that they connect. But do you have any idea what might be happening, what they might be planning to do with that? If it's, I understand it's probably still privately owned, but they haven't been doing anything with it in about over 13 years now.
Well, there is a developer that has secured. It is supposed to come down. There is a developer that I thought had been approved to build something new. I think those plans, it's another high rise. So I think that's going to happen, but I don't know what the delay is. There's some delay for some reason, but yeah, that will be a similar, like to the Berkman one, which is a high rise across from the jail. Eventually, everybody says the jail has to move. I don't think any mayor has wanted to take that on, but it does have to move, in the police department too. And that will provide another opportunity for good, development, infill development.
But I was like, say, because I work at the new courthouse. I used to work at the old courthouse, not the new one. And there are so many vacant buildings downtown. They've been vacant for, some of them for decades. Yep. I mean, so many places where they could move a new prison or build something better and even closer to the new courthouse.
Yep.
It's a lot of crazy things. So it's just so much, it's like wasting opportunities.
Yep.
Nancy or Jimmy, how how would you summarize your greatest obstacle? Is it a mindset? Is it specific people? Both?
I think it's a mindset by the leadership, the traditional, I don't know. I think it's a mindset of, and it's across, it's beyond downtown. It's of investing in ourselves, investing in our infrastructure, in the needed things. We've kind of run the city on the cheap, and so there's a lot of areas where that shows up, from the, you know, the old consolidation and the septic tanks and all these things are kind of coming. You notice now there's like a tax increase here and a fee increase there, and you know, nobody wants to be taxed, but in some sense you kind of get what you don't pay for, which is, you know, and so, you know, I'd say it's a mindset of doing that kind of you know, investment in ourselves. That would be my answer. Jimmy, you might have a different answer.
No, I agree. I think it's, I mean, we're dealing with a legacy of, frankly, not investing in the community and in public infrastructure. So we don't really recognize the benefit of that can be achieved through those investments, because we haven't seen it. And so, like for us, for instance, one of the pushbacks we've received in terms of having more parks is that, oh gosh, just more places for the homeless to gather, or more places to just fall into disrepair like Metropolitan Park. That doesn't have to be the case though. And that's what we're seeing in these other communities, is they've found ways, there's solutions by investing, but also the way that you organize. Like for instance, a lot of these other cities, they have conservancies that Nancy touched on, about public-private partnerships that are nonprofits that actually manage and program and invest and raise money for those public spaces. So there are models out there for us to replicate. As in my job, I've always told my staff, I said, I'm big about not recreating the wheel. I will steal ideas all day long, because I think that somebody else has already figured this out, is much smarter than I am out there. And let's utilize those ideas that have already proven to be successful. And that's the thing that I think, you know, that's frustrating to us, is we've seen our leaders take these trips to all these other cities. You know, every year they do the chamber does a trip to another city to look at these other communities and see what are some of the best practices, but it doesn't seem like those best practices are coming back and being implemented here. And I think this is one of those best practices that Nancy and I and our group have really recognized, is that the benefits of parks are really, I think, even surprised us, frankly. When we started doing the research, we were kind of blown away by the impact that parks can have on a community. And I think there's other things that we've seen too through this COVID, the importance of having access to nature and to public spaces has become even more important. And so, you know, there's a lot of good reasons, just unfortunately, it's just changing the old mindset and you know, getting past the status quo is often hard in Jacksonville. And we've seen that historically in Jacksonville, of course.
Before we wind this up, anybody have any last comments or questions for our guests, Jimmy and Nancy?
I have one question, if I could ask, please.
Yeah.
When my kids were a little younger, and Mayor John Delaney had built, was the one who got the metro, did that park, the Metropolitan Park. He was responsible for that. And I ran into him one day with, I forget, I can't remember if I was with my youngest daughter, with my it couldn't have been my grandkids because they're too young, but it doesn't matter. But I was down there with children and they were loving the park. They had the, that fountain that they could play in. They had the water slide there. The kids just loved it. And it was free. You could take them in, it was free. And the thing is when I ran into Mayor Delaney at the time, he said, what do you think of this? I said, it is amazing. It's lovely. We need to do more of this. And he said, I'm working on it. So my question to you is, have you reached out to former Mayor John Daley? Because he was I think he was a huge advocate of what you're proposing. And I wonder if he, you know, they are very philanthropic here in Jacksonville. And I'm wondering if you haven't reached out or if they're already a part of this.
We have, we have talked to a number of former mayors, including Daley, and he is supportive. And he did talk about his initiative that he wished he had more time to have implemented after his Better Jacksonville plan. And we also talked with Mayor Payton, who had created a very good a revitalization of Metropolitan Park. Do you know that the city actually appropriated $10 million in 2009 to renovate Metropolitan Park? And then it was diverted like a year later to pay for obligations of Tony Slayman in the landing. And so it was just swept. It had been approved through city council. And then it just went shoot. And like nobody was paying attention. I don't know what happened. And I was asleep at the wheel, I have to admit. And what he told us, what was interesting, this is Mayor Payton, is that they did not have at the time the community level of support that he sees in what we're doing. And he's the one who told us, you need a wall of support from the community so that you cannot be ignored by anybody trying to do anything. And you're not gonna just, go away. And so that's what we're doing. And he is supportive. What we haven't yet found is somebody who's gonna go out on a limb to really advocate this from somebody who has really political clout. And we're still looking for that. So a lot of people have nodded their heads, they have supported. There's very few people who want to go up against the Jaguars, and we don't want to go up against the Jaguars either. We want to do the right thing for the community. And so that's what we're focused on. And, if it means one by one and one organization at a time, that's what we're doing.
And we're another organization that you can add to your list. We have about over 1,600 members in our meetup group, and we picked up new members tonight, as a matter of fact. And I want to thank all of those people who joined the First Coast Free Thought Society tonight. So we look forward to being included in your publicity and your paperwork and whatever you do in your talks and all that. Whenever you list everybody, include us, and people will go, oh, we need to do this.
Okay. Well, we just kind of formalized a little agreement. I'll send it to you. And, it's pretty simple. We're pretty, we've been pretty loose about it, but we do like to get to know the group. So thank you so much for having us tonight. We really appreciate it.
I very much appreciate you. And is there any last minute comment? If not, we'll end it here. You've been great. You've said it all. I think we've exhausted our questions. I appreciate everybody being here. Join us next month, April 19th, when we talk about evangelicalism and American terrorism, a totally different topic, but it should be equally engaging. I look forward to seeing everybody. I appreciate everybody being here. Madeline, wherever you are, you're on now. You're in charge of ending everything. Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Nancy.